Hello, guten Tag, und grüß Gott, Newswit here. Today is January the 31st, 2021. Wonderful Sunday, sunshine all day, no rain, even though we're promised rain again for later on this week. So, without further ado, I would like to start this video with my trusty historical calendar. There's some really interesting things that are noteworthy. So let me get right to it. On January 25th in 1924, the first Winter Olympics begin. So this was the first time that they had Winter Olympics, and the National Olympics Committee declared that as part of the Olympics, that there will be a Winter Olympics. And actually it started in French in, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, Chamonix, maybe Chamonix. Anyway, it's spelled with an N-I-X, that's the last three letters in the name, in the French Alps. And guess who ran away as the winners? Of course it was the Scandinavians. Which the United States came in third. Winning its gold medal was a guy by the name of Charles Jutra. He won the 500-meter speed skating event. Canada won hockey gold, wouldn't you know it? Scoring 122 goals and allowing just 3 goals in the entire tournament. Holy crap. Of the 258 athletes, only 11 were women. Wow. So that was in 1924. In any case, it gave the Winter Olympics really gave skiing a big boost, and it became a big deal. And the next Olympics in 28 was actually held in St. Moritz, Switzerland. So there you go, the Olympics had started. Now here's something interesting. In 1500, the explorer Vicente Yanez Pinzon reached Brazil. Now this guy was a Spanish explorer. In fact, he was the captain of the Nina, of the 3 ships that Christopher Columbus took to, the European discovery of America. It was in 1493. Columbus sailed the sea. In any case, so you would say, if the Spanish actually came to Brazil first, why is Brazil speaking Portuguese? Well, it actually became Portuguese because the first colony started in Portuguese colony started in Brazil. Now I don't know whether it's the first colony total in the Americas, but Brazil was actually colonized by Portuguese, and a guy by the name of his name was Pedro Alvarez Cabral. So he's the guy that it is said that he actually spotted Brazil first, but Pinzon was the one that talked about it and mentioned Brazil and sailed down the coast all the way down to the equator. But the first people, Western people, European people, that established a colony in Brazil got the country. So there you go. And they just claimed it. It didn't matter who lived there. Just said, okay, it's now part of Brazil. Interesting. And that's the way things were done in those days. The one that had the bigger power, would just say, well, it's now mine. What can you do about it? Well, if you come with sticks and stones after us, and we have swords and armor and guns, well, then, the result is obvious. In 1988, National Geographic Society is officially founded. I didn't realize it was that old. I knew it was old. But here's something interesting. In 1959, Vince Lombardi is hired as the Packers coach. Now, this is to me, Vince Lombardi has always been a big deal. And of course now, the Super Bowl trophy is called the Vince Lombardi Trophy. Well, this guy, when he was hired by the Packers, just had a shitload full of wins and became a big name. But actually, he was a big name before because, I remember people when I lived in Illinois, and I lived near Chicago, and of course, Notre Dame, wasn't too far away. And everyone in Chicago and the surrounding area was a big fan of, it wasn't just about the Bulls, but it was also about Notre Dame football, for the college football, for those who like college football. And I remember people always talking about who are the three kings. They were Ara Parsegian, Knut Rockne, and and Vince Lombardi. Those were the three wise men, that that they considered, the three wise men of Notre Dame. Anyway, the greats all got their start in Notre Dame for some reason, and then they went on to other places in the NFL. So, Vince Lombardi haunted me, quite a bit because, when I, in my first professional career, when I started at U.S. Steel, I remember, one of our superintendents, always, I work by Vince Lombardi time. And Vince Lombardi time was you always show up 5 or 10 minutes early before the meeting. So he didn't tolerate people that came in late. It's really bad news. In any case, in 1891, Liliuokalani is proclaimed Queen of Hawaii, and she was deposed right away because, the people didn't think she was the right guy. And the people actually were the Americans who lived there and started to, grow the pineapple and export the pineapple and start to do business there. So her reign came to an end in 1887. So she reigned for, basically 6 years or so. So what happened is that she was pressured out by the U.S. investors and sugar planters that restricted the rights of native Hawaiians and stripped the monarchy of power. Now, the reason she lost her throne is because she thought that was the wrong thing to do, and so she didn't recognize that agreement of what they call the Committee of Safety, and it's always, given wonderful names, the Committee of Safety was organized by a Hawaiian-born American. And this will not be a surprise to you because his name was Sanford B. Dole. Aha! He staged a coup against Queen Liliuokalani with the support of U.S. Marines and the U.S. Minister of Hawaii, John Stevens, another name that is prominent in politics. And Stevens recognized Dole's government on his own authority and proclaimed Hawaii as a U.S. protectorate. So Dole submitted a treaty of annexation to the U.S. Senate, but the Democrats opposed it, especially after it was revealed that Hawaiians did not want annexation. President Grover Cleveland tried to restore Queen Liliuokalani to the throne by sending a new U.S. minister to Hawaii, but Dole ignored the order to step down and instead proclaimed the independent Republic of Hawaii and officially deposing the Queen. But in 1998, the United States fully annexed the islands. And that's how Hawaii became, ultimately in the 1950s, the 50th state. There you go. In 75, and Erno Rubik applies for a patent for his magic cube. We do know about the Rubik's Cube. Now, he was a Hungarian inventor, and noticed that this thing that he created was really kind of interesting. And if you paint the squares different colors, then it could become entertaining, and so it did. Everybody worked on the Rubik's Cube, and now it's really easy. People can put the Rubik's Cube together, just with a few motions behind their back, even, if you know how to do that. In 1865, the House passes the 13th Amendment. What was the 13th Amendment? Abolishment of slaves. So the abolishment of slavery was passed at the U.S. Senate, but died in the House of Representatives. Because Democrats rallied in the name of the state of states' rights. And how about that, huh? Well, Lincoln preferred the amendment received bipartisan support. Some Democrats indicated support for the measure, but many still resisted. The amendment was passed 119 to 56, 7 votes above the necessary 2/3 majority. Well, that just goes to show you that back in the 1800s, even after the Civil War, there were a lot of people that thought that slavery was still the right thing for America, even though Britain had abandoned it a long time ago. So much for the historical calendar. I want to spend the rest of this video, is probably shorter than most of my others, talking a little bit about the Schlesinger some more, because there's some interesting things that I may or may not have mentioned in the previous video. And one of the things that I want to talk about is about my grandfather from the mother's side, Wilhelm Schlesinger, who was forced into labor in Siberia, Russia. And so I said in my previous video that I knew my grandfather because he came to live with us, and he came and was released from Siberian captivity. Well, what happened to this guy who hadn't, maybe for decades before he was deported, hadn't worked with his hands, and so, just his knowledge of weaving equipment was, like weaving looms was his stock and trade. And so he was a manager of a weaving factory and in Poland. And, when the Russians came, all of the businesses stopped, and he was, of course, deported. Now, he was deported for hard labor. And that's a guy, that hadn't worked with his hands, as I said just now. And so it was really hard for him. So he developed a heart disease because people, like you can imagine, in Siberia, where it's super cold, they weren't really treated well. Now, what I don't know exactly was what his job was. And his job was simply hard labor. One of the things that he told me that he had to put his hands, and was standing in a pit, putting his hands on, into ice cold water, turning valves and stuff. But anyway, it was basically slave labor. And he didn't do anything to anybody, he was not a criminal. He was just a German, So his criminality was being German. How stupid is that kind of thing? But anyway, I didn't say how it came to pass that he was released from Siberia, but he told me the story, and I think we told the family the story. It turned out that he developed a skill that he didn't have. And the skill was wood carving, which was actually kind of strange to him, but he was able to carve animal figurines of elephants, tigers, lions, probably mostly figurines of African animals, that the soldiers that were in charge, they really liked that. So he kind of ingratiated himself with carving these wooden figures, and they thought that these were. I wish I had one of those, but I don't. But he said that he himself was surprised that he was able to do that, and to have a surprise talent, is a little bit reminiscent of what is it, Bush 44, or whoever. George Bush, George Bush II, was discovered that he had a talent in painting. I think so there are evidently latent talents that are not necessarily exploited or explored by people, and they pop out. So anyway, he got himself moved up on a list, evidently, to be released. And, the fact that he got really sick and they couldn't care for him and maybe didn't want to let him die there also helped a bit, and that's how he came to live with us in Marbach. There's another anecdote that was really interesting. Now, these camps were really quite brutal, and the fact that he survived it was amazing. He said that one of the most important implements that he had with him that he had to keep and take care of was a shovel. Oh, I don't know what you do with a shovel, when the ground is frozen over, but who knows what exactly they did. But every morning they had to, his entire camp had to stand for muster, and they had a shovel. Now, the thing was that sometimes shovels broke or people got pissed off and threw the shovel away. But actually, there was severe punishment for not having a shovel. So if you showed up for muster without your shovel, you were put aside. And from what he tells me, these guys were never seen again. Okay? So punishment was severe. What would happen is that sometime in the middle of the night, when somebody was sleeping, somebody that didn't have a shovel would steal a shovel so that he could stand up in the morning with a shovel in his hand. Imagine that, the horror, and then the guy that woke up without a shovel. So what happened is, what he told me, is they would sleep with their shovel. So imagine, you didn't have your wife, you had a shovel. In any case, so that's how that's how he wound up and being released. But overall, the Russians, had so many prisoners in the camps that they actually, post-war economy in Russia was not really that good either, because they had suffered quite a bit. And so they probably couldn't care for a lot of prisoners. And so they began to let Germans go. And, for instance, one of my neighbor's friends, who was actually in the army as a prisoner in Siberia, his father, not he. So he got his father back also. And another friend, that was also held prisoner. So there were at least 3 people that I'm aware of in Marbach, in my immediate surroundings, that came back from Russia. So, maybe they just ran out of work. And, the ground was too hard to dig graves. Oh, shit. War really, really sucks, believe me. So, I just want to talk a little bit about, how is it that Germans, or maybe people from other ethnic groups and countries, wind up in other countries? Well, the borders were kind of fluid in Europe. the Europeans like to go to war with each other, and the borders would change, and that kind of thing. So, and often talented people were invited to come into the country and then live there unmolested, like my parents, the Schlesners, our grandparents, the Schlesners. They came to Poland, and the Browns, which would be from my grandmother's side, because they had special talents. I've already talked about my grandfather. I'm not sure what the Browns did, although we found out subsequently that the Browns were evidently very wealthy. They were landholders, because just very recently my wife was contacted, we were contacted, because I'm actually in the line of my grandmother as an inheritor, and the Poles evidently are trying to make good about all the bad things that they've done to the Germans, and so they were looking for heirs, and so my name popped up to these Germans. But what happened was there was somebody in a generation a little bit before me that was then the recipient of these reparations, whatever they were, that the Poles provided. Who knows? But it was an interesting thing that I was actually an heir apparent, and yes, I'm in the direct line of the Browns and the Schlesners and the Kragers and so on, as my other siblings are, and their children and so on. So anyway, the other thing that I wanted to talk about is Germans in other countries, and I've briefly mentioned the Volga Germans, and that my aunt, Tante Lotte, married a Volga German who was quite a bit older than she, maybe by 20-some years or more. But anyway, and I wish I could remember his name, but I do remember his last name, and his last name was Nahirny, which is interesting, that he was a German, and his German was fluent. And I've met other Volga Germans. We used to call them Volga Germans because the Russians kicked them out. Well, as it turned out, that I just recently read there are still a lot of Germans living in Russia, in towns that were typically German, or mostly German. But these guys, they were just like the Germans in Poland. They were fluent in Polish, and those guys in Russia, they were also fluent in Russian. And so, unless a neighbor ratted on somebody that's saying, oh, this guy's really a German, they became indistinguishable from the rest of Russia, and so that's why they're probably still there. And all they had to do is adopt some sort of a Russian name, and then they were spared, the exodus, so to speak, which is what happened. And there's still some Germans there now. Whether they still can speak German, who knows? For instance, in my case, we moved to America in 1956, and now it's 2021, and I'm far more fluent in English than I am in German, because I don't speak German to anybody except occasionally when I meet a German. But when we visited Germany, I noticed that it does come back pretty quickly, and you just kind of plug right in. The thing that never leaves you is whether you can understand German. You may not be able to muster up the vocabulary, but you can certainly understand. And I have relationships with some Germans on Facebook, specifically children of my friend Kurt Huber. And they'll write to me in in German, and that's fine, because I write to back in English, and that's how we get along. And the other thing that happened in my family is that my parents would speak German to us, okay, because it was more comfortable with them. We would answer in English, and it was seamless. Nobody really cared, and sometimes they would speak English, sometimes they would speak German, but mostly when they really wanted to explain something, it was in German, and we had no trouble understanding it. But I think it was only Walter and I, my brother Walter and I think Heidi can still speak German pretty good, but she was very little when 1956, so she was little when we came here. Peter, well, I'm sure that he understood very well. Not sure whether he could speak German. Unfortunately, we've dispersed throughout the country of the United States, so sometimes we communicate by messenger or something like that, In any case, I wanted to mention the Volga Germans a little bit because my aunt, married one. And they had a community in near Marbach in the surrounding area. So these were really characters, they were hard drinking. They kind of acted more like Russians, but they were all fluent in German and spoke German. And so, my mother, back in the 40s, she was a young woman. She was in her 30s, and pretty good looking. And she had really great legs and so forth. And so, some of my dad's friends, they were looking at her, as, hey, you really hit the jackpot there, and so on. And then I remember one night, it was in the middle of the night, I heard this sound, and I woke up, and it was this deep, throaty sound, and it was singing. It was deep, throaty singing. And I opened the window, and I looked outside, and there were a bunch of guys standing there singing. And it turned out that they were serenading my mom in the middle of the night. And she yelled at them, "Go home, don't do this," because in the middle of the night, the neighbors were, So these Volga Germans, they knew the Russian songs, and, a typical song would be like, if you Google it, like the Volga Boatsman, and the Russians have really an interesting way of singing, because it's really kind of like the Katori monks, really deep, throaty kind of singing. It's beautiful, and I've heard it often because these guys would just get together and sing, Anyway, so that was one of the stories. The other thing that this guy had, he was interesting. It was an interesting guy. I can't really remember what he looked like, but I interacted with him often, not on a personal basis. I would have known more, but, just by being around. They had a car. He had a car, and that was really remarkable back in the early 40s, to have a car in Germany and being able to drive it. But that car was actually a wood gasser. And, I talk about wood gassing in one of my previous videos, and it's kind of an interesting way of, not using gasoline and still being able to drive a car. Now, this car was a passenger car, and it had the wood stove where the trunk is kind of built in. What I do remember about that car is that it was called an Essex Super 6. I've Googled that since, and, Essex, of course, is a town in England. I couldn't find that wood gasser, on the internet, but there've got to be pictures on it from somewhere. Anyway, he would come when Tante Lotte wanted to visit, and with his car, and reconnect with his Volga Germans, and they would, they would just get shit-faced, and they'd start singing and telling stories, But, it was post-war stuff, and they were happy to be alive. In any case, that's that's what I wanted to add to that. There are probably some other things. But the Essex Super 6, if you're a car buff and you're listening to this, see whether you can find anything on it, because even wood gas-driven cars, it's like you see those cars on Mad Max, I don't know how they made those going. They probably used gasoline engines, and the wood gas thing was just a prop, But yeah, so you can have cars and you can have trucks without gasoline, or natural gas, or Now it's of no consequence because what do we have? Fuel cells and we have Tesla. In any case, I think I had a lot of fun doing this, but remember that that ethnicity is kind of goes with the blood, you know. And you know, for instance, for somebody to call me Polish, you know, would be a misnomer, because even though I was born in Poland, you know, we were Protestants, we were Prussians, you know, left over from when that part of Poland was Prussia, you know. So, and the Schlesners were certainly Germans, and the Browns were Germans, and the Kreges, you know, that actually come from the name Krehe, they were Germans. But people do tend to keep their ethnicity for quite a long time, especially if religion goes with it. And I would imagine that's how the Jews survive in the diaspora, and probably by the same methodology, they keep the faith. Okay, they keep the faith, and that's what makes them, well, a little different, you know. So with that, I will bid you farewell. Auf Wiedersehen. Goodbye. And may we infect the universe with us.